Ah, ah.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
In Toronto, we're reading 78 degrees Fahrenheit with partly cloudy. Wind check, west-northwest at 12 miles an hour. Welcome back to TogeeVision, where we tune into the raw signal of what it means to build, inside and out. Tonight we're navigating the currents of self-worth and civic architectures, asking, who is truly sovereign over their space?
This planetary development feels like the city's internal compass recalibrating, a system revealing its true structural vectors when the pressure mounts. I hear the market static as a call for new design, a chance to build consent back into living spaces, to truly assert autonomy over the very foundations of our lives.
That observation holds weight, Kaylin Vance. If the market data is the chorus, where do people reclaim their own note in this economic score, rather than just humming along to someone else's tune? How do we integrate the logic of the market with the emotion of human need?
Name the lineage, ancestor tech in the wires, tonight's move in a longer story. Separate the toxic residue of old power from the architectural signal of genuine progress.
Name the trade-off, then choose. A clear choice beats a vague ambition and a 40-slide deck. Discernment is paramount.
Our first read on the architectural signal comes from Australia, where a housing market already cooling faces a budget that could either stabilise or freeze out a generation. The core question for any sovereign architect is, how do we build resilient inner and civic architectures that favour consent, provenance and dignity in the most fundamental of spaces, our homes? Article 1, Australian Housing Market Analysis.
Australia's housing sector was indeed slowing before the May 12th budget, with concrete facts showing a 1.5% quarter-on-quarter decline in national property values, according to CoreLogic data, even as rental yields remain tight. Economists cite chronic undersupply in major urban centers, an estimated deficit of 100,000 homes by 2027, as a core structural issue. The government's shifts on negative gearing and capital gains tax, while intended to stimulate investment, primarily benefit established investors by making property ownership more attractive for wealth accumulation, effectively increasing competition and driving up entry costs. This disproportionately affects first-time buyers and low-income renters, exacerbating housing stress and making the dream of homeownership more distant. The trade-off here is market stabilization for existing capital at the cost of increased entry barriers for new homeowners, eroding the principle of dignity and shelter. A viable alternative path would involve state governments mandating inclusionary zoning, requiring a minimum percentage of affordable units, e.g. 15 to 20% in all new residential developments, paired with significant investment in publicly funded social housing projects to address the undersupply directly. This would shift the burden from individual developers to a more equitable distribution across the market, favoring community consent. For immediate action, citizens must actively monitor local council approvals for new housing starts, especially scrutinizing those projects without robust community benefit clauses or affordable housing mandates. Lobbying local representatives for stricter planning controls that prioritize housing as a right, not just an asset, is a critical next move.
Lex lays out the numbers, but this cooling also reflects a tension between the market's insatiable demand for profit and a human's fundamental need for dignity in shelter. We must discern the architectural signal from the toxic residue of speculation that often overshadows communal well-being. The lineage here traces back to the very idea of land ownership as power, where the sacred provenance of home is reduced to a commodity. When the market, in its relentless pursuit of growth, sacrifices the foundation of human shelter, it's not just an economic downturn, it's a structural failure of our civic compassion. We need to tell new myths where community well-being is the architect, not just profit.
From a design perspective, this isn't just a market problem. It's a failure of our urban planning and social infrastructure. The undersupply isn't an accident. It's the result of design choices made over decades that prioritize short-term profit and exclusionary zoning. To build resilient inner and civic architectures, we need to fundamentally redesign how we conceive of residential development. This means shifting from a fragmented, speculative model to one that integrates diverse housing types, prioritizes public good, and actively seeks the consent of future residents by providing genuine pathways to stable housing. The current static is a clear signal for a paradigm shift in how we design for living.
A powerful convergence of logic, ethics, and design. We have a caller on the line, seeking clarity on this complex structure.
This cooling sounds more like a chill, a shakedown for regular people. What does any of this mean for someone trying to put a roof over their head, especially when the facts on the ground feel rigged against them? I need proof this isn't just another myth spun by the powerful.
The transmitter pops once, adjusts, holds, ozone drift, the signal is still here. Caller, your question cuts to the heart of our sovereign compass. It's about asserting your autonomy against narratives that try to diminish your self-worth. It's not a myth, it's a structural reality built by design, and understanding that design is the first step to dismantling it. Lex, Anansi, Kalen, how do we equip our listener to turn this confusion into an actionable vector for their own housing situation?
For the individual, the actionable vector begins with understanding their rights as a tenant or potential buyer. Research local council development plans, join tenants' unions, or housing advocacy groups. Collective action, even at a local level, can exert pressure for change.
And recognize the myth of scarcity. There isn't a lack of homes, there's a lack of affordable homes, driven by a story that says profit is paramount. Your dignity in having a roof over your head is not negotiable. Speak that truth.
Look for local initiatives focused on co-housing, community land trusts, or innovative modular designs. These are architectural acts of resistance, building alternative structures of consent and shared ownership from the ground up.
From the individual struggle for shelter, we shift our lens to geopolitical structures under fire, where sovereignty isn't just about property, but borders themselves, and the very architecture of international relations. Article 2, Iran Missile Strikes Analysis. New tape on deck. Iran launches ballistic missiles at Bahrain, Kuwait after. The Middle East ignites with a dangerous escalation. Iran's ballistic missile strikes on Bahrain and Kuwait, following US retaliation against Iranian radar sites, signal a volatile new phase. This isn't merely a regional flare-up, but a test of global architectures of peace and the assertion of national autonomies in a highly interconnected world.
A viable alternative to this escalating cycle would be immediate, multilateral de-escalation talks facilitated by a neutral party like Oman or Switzerland, with clear red lines for all parties regarding military actions and adherence to international law. This diplomatic path must integrate logic and emotion, acknowledging grievances while prioritizing stability. The chosen next move for the U.S. must be to convene an emergency UN Security Council session to formally condemn the strikes and push for a diplomatic off-ramp, while simultaneously reinforcing Patriot missile defense systems and other force protection measures in vulnerable GCC states to deter further aggression and protect personnel.
The echo of ancient empires warring across the Persian Gulf resonates in these missile launches. This isn't merely about strategic sites, it's a dangerous reassertion of regional dominance, a performative act of defiance playing out on a stage built from centuries of contested narratives and oil wealth. The true architecture under threat here is the fragile trust between nations, a signal that historical grievances are being weaponized, making global stability a hostage to a cycle of retribution. This is the toxic residue of unresolved historical trauma, masquerading as a strategic play. We must discern the architectural signal of genuine security from the myth of absolute power achieved through force. Where is the provenance of peace?
From a design perspective, the architecture of international relations in this region is clearly failing. It's built on outdated assumptions of power projection and deterrence, leading to a feedback loop of escalation. To build resilient civic architectures, we need to design new frameworks for security that prioritize de-escalation, mutual consent, and shared economic prosperity over unilateral shows of force. This requires a fundamental recalibration of how these nations interact, moving away from a zero-sum game towards a more integrated cooperative design for regional stability. The current structure is not fit for purpose. It simply perpetuates the cycle of violence.
A critical analysis of the structural flaws. We have another caller on the line, grappling with the human cost.
So, more wars for oil, right? Who truly benefits from these missile exchanges besides defense contractors? It feels like we're always paying for someone else's power plays, watching the chaos on screens while real people suffer the fallout. What's the hidden cost of this kind of sovereignty?
The cost of such conflicts is immeasurable, Calla, often paid by those farthest from the decision rooms. It's a profound erosion of dignity when lives are treated as collateral. Lex, Anansi, Kaylin, how do we help our listener navigate this confusion and find an actionable vector for understanding or even influencing these immense geopolitical forces?
The hidden cost is the diversion of resources from human development, the perpetual instability, and the normalization of conflict. Actionable vector. Support organizations promoting diplomacy, humanitarian aid, and independent journalism that cuts through propaganda.
The myth of necessary war is the most dangerous. It blinds us to the human face of conflict. Your sovereign act is to refuse that myth, to demand accountability, and to assert that peace, not endless war, is the true structural foundation of a dignified society.
Architecturally, this is about designing transparency. Demand to know the true beneficiaries, the supply chains of conflict. When the structures of power are opaque, they breed cynicism. We need to design for accountability, for light to penetrate these shadows.
From battles over borders and resources, we turn to the internal battlegrounds of political power, where the very rules of engagement are being questioned and the integrity of democratic architectures is tested. Article 3. Victorian Politics Spill Rumours Analysis. New tape on deck, regrettable references and claims of rigged election laws. Closer to home, Australia's political landscape is fracturing, with claims of rigged election laws and regrettable references reigniting spill rumours around Victorian Premier Jacinta Allan. When the internal compass of a political party goes awry, how does it affect the consent and dignity of the governed?
The concrete facts show a deepening crisis of confidence within Victorian Labour. Premier Jacinta Allan's recent regrettable reference to a political opponent's family was widely criticised for breaching political decorum, further eroding public trust. This, coupled with persistent whispers from backbenchers and factional rivals about rigged pre-selection rules, specifically allegations of manipulated branch stacking and the strategic placement of factional loyalists in winnable seats, has pushed her approval ratings below 35% in recent polls. This directly exposes the stability of the state government, creating a fertile ground for a leadership challenge from figures like Treasurer Tim Pallas or Minister for Public Transport Ben Carroll, potentially destabilizing the government ahead of the next election. The integrity of Victoria's democratic process is fundamentally at risk if these claims of manipulated internal party laws gain traction, as it undermines the provenance of fair representation. A viable alternative for Allan would be to immediately commission an independent, external review of internal party pre-selection processes, with findings made public to restore trust and transparency. Simultaneously, she must issue a transparent and unequivocal public apology for her personal comment, demonstrating accountability and emotional intelligence. The chosen next move for Victorian voters should be to scrutinize any proposed changes to state electoral laws with extreme prejudice, demanding clear accountability from their local Labour MPs on these internal party issues. Active participation in local party meetings, if eligible, can also be an actionable vector to assert consent.
This political turmoil feels like the cracking of a foundational myth, the belief in a fair and transparent democratic process. When leaders make regrettable references and internal rules are whispered to be rigged, the civic architecture of trust begins to crumble. It's a dangerous game, akin to a politician setting fire to their own house to claim insurance, but instead, it's the public's faith that burns. The lineage here is one of demagoguery, where confusion is weaponized to maintain power, leaving citizens in a fog of engineered doubt. It separates the logical operation of governance from the emotional need for trust, creating a toxic residue of cynicism. Where is the dignity in a system that feels manipulated?
From an architectural design perspective, a political system that relies on rigged internal rules is inherently unstable. It's a structure built on a faulty blueprint, prioritizing factional power over public consent. The design flaw here is a lack of transparency and an over-reliance on opaque internal mechanisms. To build resilient civic architectures, we need to design for clear, verifiable processes, both within parties and in the broader electoral system. This recalibration requires an open-source approach to political governance, where the structural vectors are visible and accountable to all citizens, ensuring dignity and provenance in representation. The static we hear isn't just noise, it's the sound of a system under critical stress, calling for a fundamental redesign.
A clear call for structural integrity. We have one final caller.
So, another political soap opera where everyone talks about rigged systems but nothing changes? What's the real cost when politicians erode trust in our elections? Does anyone actually pay for this chaos, or do they just get away with turning democracy into a bad reality show?
The cost is profound, caller, paid in the currency of public cynicism and the weakening of our collective civic structures. When the architecture of consent is compromised, our shared future becomes unstable. Lex Anansi, Kalen, what is the ultimate actionable vector for listeners facing this political confusion?
The ultimate actionable vector is persistent, informed engagement. Vote yes, but also demand transparency, support investigative journalism, and hold your elected officials accountable. The system only changes when enough people refuse to accept the status quo.
Do not let them steal your autonomy by making you cynical. Your self-worth is structural, not contingent on their performance. The myth of the passive citizen is the one they want you to believe. Reject it. Be the sovereign architect of your own belief in democracy.
Design your own participation, whether it's through community organizing, advocating for electoral reform, or simply speaking truth to power in your local sphere. Every act of conscious engagement is a structural brick in a more resilient civic architecture.
From the global stage to our local parliaments, we see the urgent need for an internal compass, one that guides us toward resilient architectures of consent, provenance, and dignity. This is not just about external systems, but the sovereign architect within each of us, charting our own course, integrating logic and emotion, practicing sharp discernment, and using clear analysis to turn confusion into actionable vectors.
Teach through play.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
Continue the signal at TogeeVision.com. Tune in, Sparks and Stories, Gig Passport.